Right, thank you, Madam Chair. This is the residential part of the workshop now. You should have in front of you just a single piece of paper, which is just headed up further amendments to residential chapter arising from feedback to date. And it's just a single piece of paper. Yes, that's it. Yeah. So, as you'll see, there's just 4 matters to run through, and the first one here is about the residential intensification around some suburban centres, and John Scallon can take you through those maps. And as I said previously, it was just to make sure we'd captured what you were intending from the last workshop. Make sure we got that right, so I'll just leave that to John to take you through. Thank you.
Thanks, Andy. So I will go through each of the centres just in alphabetical order. So starting with Bishopdale, the direction from the last meeting was to include an additional area to the northeast of Harewood Road in Bishopdale. I'll just indicate on the screen. And this area here, which is horizontal hash, is the area that we've included as an addition from the last time we were, you saw this map. Yes, it was, yes. Okay. So Hornby, the consensus that we took from the last meeting was that the area was appropriate as it was, so we've made no changes to the map there.
I thought one of the questions we had is around Bermuda Drive, around that area, Branson Intermediate, that was an area that could be intensified. You've only got 2 very small places in Hornby.
Yes.
We agreed it last time, but we do recall actually in reflection when we got down towards Linwood and the high intensification on the areas quite a distance from the key activity centre, that in reflection we looked back at what was happening here and thought it wasn't enough.
So around Neil Street, around that whole area, what I can't understand is the justification for not having any intensification. Maybe you could just help us understand that again. But we know that there's shopping, we know there's traffic, access.
Yeah, but there was horrible access on the Linwood one as well.
Maybe we'll know the answer if John doesn't.
So,
can I just assume that you didn't, that wasn't your understanding, John? Your understanding was that it should be just as it is? You hadn't recorded it that way?
My recollection and notes certainly record there was some debate around this particular area last time, but my notes indicate that the consensus was that it was to not be included.
Okay.
So this is Linwood. Okay. So you'll recall last time that the area extended to the north and to the east of the centre, and also to the south of Linwood Park. So the direction we received was to look at this area again, and we have removed this area to the south of Linwood Park, again shown in the hash there. These 2 small pockets here, to the west of Linwood Park, we've retained within the residential medium density zone, and that's largely to reflect the fact that there is already significant change in those particular blocks. A number of them have actually already transitioned to a medium density built
Can I
form.
just quickly ask what the residential suburban density transition actually means?
Okay, the residential suburban density transition is effectively a renaming of what was going to be the Living 2 overlay. So it effectively covers the extent of the existing Living 2 area in the operative plan.
Is the L2, is that the same as the medium density? Is it like the same?
No, so that's why it's called a transition area. L2 is basically a transitional zone between L1 and L3, which now L1 is the suburban residential suburban.
Yep.
So and L3 is medium density. Yep. So in effect, L2, which we named as density transition, is the transitional zone in terms of density between the suburban and the medium density.
Okay, that's great.
In terms of Pamela Street, Pauline Street, Chelsea Street, why have you included that? Like, it's got pretty poor traffic access, and yeah, I'd just be interested in your thoughts. I mean, I know it's around the mall, but that provides its own issues in terms of cars, parking, etc., etc.
If I can just indicate, is this area to the east of the mall here? Is that the northeast? Okay, so you're correct. The area is very close to the mall. The criteria is primarily around access, and the primary access is by walking. So that's what we've looked at as the base criteria for selecting the areas. Vehicle access to the centre around these areas is not necessarily a high level criteria. It's really around walking access. I may just go back to Hornby. So one of the issues around Hornby is the industrial area, which is indicated here, which is part of the purple area on the map. One of the things we'd be mindful of in looking at these areas for intensification is potential for reverse sensitivity impacts. And as we discussed at the previous meeting, around Hornby you have these B5 industrial zones which come quite close to the mall and approximate to the existing residential area. And in order to avoid reverse sensitivity, we thought it was appropriate to avoid increasing the density in the areas that are closest to these industrial zones. These areas in brown are Living 2 at the moment under the operative plan and would transition to the residential medium density transition zone. So in effect, medium density is enabled in these areas at the moment and will be in the future, although not to the same density as it will be enabled in these areas up here to the west of the park.
Linwood.
Are we still in Hornby?
Linwood.
Yep. I believe it's a mix of Living 1 and Living 2, mostly Living 1, correct?
The same aspect is relevant for all key activity centres. So then we would need to not intensify around any of the key activity centres, which all have a mall as it stands now. So there would be a small conflict in the objective of intensifying around key activity centres and your argument of saying, well, key activity centres have high traffic issues, therefore we shouldn't.
This one looks incredibly big. If you were going to cut it back, which are the bits that you would forego? I personally don't have a problem with it, but I'm aware that these guys have to represent this area.
There's actually a
So-
question, I'm looking at the old city plan L3 zoning and the designation of what that looks like. Was this L3 prior? So this has always been L3. So there's no actual change here.
The new yellows are the new areas. The L3 to the left of the map, basically, is existing. Yes.
Yes, so
The Percy
that whole
Street,
area there is already
That is
pre-existing
existing,
L3.
the Percy Suffolk yellow.
Yes.
So
That's always been,
yes.
Yes.
Right.
So would we come
Okay.
under issues
Okay.
changing it back if we've got existing landowners who have bought it?
okay, yeah, fair point. So the actual new areas of intensification are over here in Rona, Maclean, round Linwood Intermediate area.
Immediately around the mall.
Okay, so that extra bit of yellow on the left of the map, I recall this now, sorry, is already that.
Correct.
My apologies. Okay, right. So if you take that out, Yanni, it's relatively similar to most of the other key activity centres.
We'll find out and come
Yeah,
back.
we'll find out.
And come back to that one.
I would support that being residential suburban density transition. Again, if I go back to the fact that this is a huge amount of intensification for this area that is already struggling. You've got a huge area that, and again, without knowing what it was previously, so if you look at like even the brown stuff, I don't know, is that all ongoing for L2?
No, the brown is existing living two under the operative plan. And again, as with this area to the west, it has been for that way for some time.
Right. So the extra bit is the bit of yellow on the right. Pamela, Pauline, Rona, Maclean, Norwich area.
If we wanted to intensify, we go to L2 or straight to L3. And my preference would be that goes to L2, given the fact that, or it's the new one, residential density transition, given the fact that you do have already a huge amount of intensification in this point.
Except when you think about it, that Linwood Intermediate School site would make a fantastic development.
Well, they can probably already do that through
EDM.
the EDM or there's other planning mechanisms that people can do intensive development. And I don't know where that would fit in this area, but you think housing along Children's Street, Housing New Zealand have a whole bunch of houses down there. So
There is some similarities between the extent that the EDM applies in this area and the extent of the residential medium density zone that's indicated on the map here. You're right, around Linwood Intermediate site, the EDM criteria would apply largely around this area. It's a bit patchy, which is a result of having a criteria-based assessment rather than a mapping approach. One way to look at it would be by zoning to residential medium density, particularly in this block, between the mall and the school. You're effectively filling in the blanks where the EDM wouldn't apply, which one
It's actually
potential outcome is a more consistent urban form across that block.
It's actually a fantastic area for intensification, that area around McLean Street though. It's got everything on its back door. Great park, interesting mall.
Actually, so it's cut off from the mall and along the park.
No, there's a big median strip that you cross over quite easily, even with the class of Linwood intermediate school kids with you.
There is another area of open space to the
Yep.
north of this block as well.
Yeah, that's right, the Worcester Reserve, yeah. Okay, so have you got a proposal, Yanni? Because,
Yeah, I think that should approve it to the residential.
so which part particularly?
Both those parts around the mall and that other.
So both the yellow bits around the mall, which are the only bits that are actually changing, but those are the only new additions, aren't they? Yeah? So you're suggesting that we don't do anything around the Linwood Shopping Centre?
The change would go from L1 to L2.
Is that actually, how much of a change is that actually now?
From L1 to L2.
Is there an L1 and L2, or have they kind of gotten similar, more similar?
L2 allows you to do effectively 30 households per hectare at the upper range of what's possible in Living 2. L1, developed to its full capacity, would deliver somewhere between 20 and 25. Very much depends on the layout of the sites and what you can do in terms of subdivision. The big difference between operative Living 1 and Living 2 is in the site coverage, and the site size, which really dictates what the density will be. When you move into existing Living 3, which is approximate to residential medium density, the way that the minimum site size is calculated changes, which allows you to achieve higher densities than 30 households per hectare. So in terms of a change, yes, in theory there is less of a change going from Living 2 to residential medium density than there may be from moving from Living 1 to residential medium density.
And we don't yet know whether this is Living 1 or Living 2. That's what somebody's finding out, is it?
Yes.
Okay. Hey, Jimmy. Sorry.
Yes, they are. Yes, they are. So just to be clear, the change in this area to the north of the mall is largely a transition from Living 2 to residential medium density. This area over here, I can't draw you the exact extent on the map, but this area involves some change from what is currently Living 1 to residential medium density.
Right. Okay, do you want to put some changes, Liani, or?
You're on, Ekin.
If you're going to keep this area as L3, and we're seeing huge intensification in there, despite the fact that local schools are getting quite,
Thank you.
then I just think that just putting a huge amount of intensification into one area of the facility, which I don't think is fair. I don't know how the infrastructure copes. We do know that the Green Station in Bess Street and Randolph Street is completely flooded, and it's getting severe flooding. We know that, so I don't even know how the infrastructure
Well, I'm assuming, given that that was one of the requirements, that the infrastructure had to be able to sustain the development, that that's been checked. Is that a fair assessment?
The advice from the engineers is that there is not a constraint on medium
Right.
density development in this area.
Yanni, did you want to answer Yanni's question? So I'm assuming that the area around Rona, McLean, etc. was mostly living 2, and that the area around Chelsea, Russell, Pamela was mostly living 1.
So I'll try and indicate as best I can on the map here.
Sorry.
So really the block bordering the mall itself is currently living 2.
Yeah.
And then this area here, quite a small area, is living 1, and there's also a strip of living 2 actually along the road frontage.
And on the
And
other
then
side
there's
of the
probably some elements of living 1 just on some of these blocks at the far edge of this, as
road? Right,
indicated on
and
the
the other side of the road? All L2?
This is all L2.
Okay, right. Okay.
Can I
Do you
just-
want to move something, Yanni? Because I'm going to get move on these.
On the map that we've got, it says B2P. What is B2P? It doesn't say L2.
Parking.
This business 2 parking is actually within this purple area here.
So it's parking at the moment.
That's connected with the mall.
It's Chelsea Street. So it's something's not right on the map that we've got.
Right. Yanni, do you want to move something? This is as I understood. The last decision was made. But do you want to suggest a change at this stage?
Yeah, I'll suggest a change that the area around the mall.
The entire area.
Yeah.
The entire area be not rezoned. Is that what you're moving?
Be residential suburban density transition.
From L1 to L2.
So it goes from L1 to L2,
Yeah.
including the area around Linwood Intermediate.
Because it can have the
Okay.
it can have the
Can I just get an indication? So this is the, just for those who've come in late, a little bit of yellow on the right by around Linwood Intermediate School and the bit around Pamela and Chelsea Street are the only bits actually affected by the current change. The big bit of yellow on the other side around Buckley and Suffolk and Percy are already living 3 or whatever you call them, medium density. So the area that's under debate is the area right around the mall. And actually part of the strategic statement talks about intensifying areas around good key activity centres. So Yanni's not in favour of it. Can I just, are you in favour of it, Paul?
I'll go with Yanni's recommendation.
Right, Ellie?
I just want to know about traffic, and I know we talked about infrastructure and so forth, but especially with school in the area, where are we at with possibly widening roads, with drains running, whatever, is there provision of that? Surely with the intensification, comes more people, comes more traffic.
There's somewhat fewer schools going in the area.
Don't talk to me now.
There are somewhat fewer schools going in the area than were there.
So perhaps if I can ask David Falconer from the Transport chapter to answer that question.
Sure. So the reason why, one of the reasons why we are trying to intensify around existing key activity centres and existing malls is to obviously reduce the distance where people have to travel to access the services. And if we didn't allow for intensification around these areas, then the growth would have to go in a more remote location in the periphery of the city, for example, where that would generate even more traffic than what it would if people were living here where they could walk to their shops. So that's one of the rationale around why we're trying to encourage intensification, to try and reduce the overall amount of traffic. Yes, it will increase some traffic in this area, but the reality is with the population projections that we've got over the next 30 years, the growth in the city is the equivalent to the amount of people who live in Dunedin. So there's the city will grow by about 130 odd residents, 1,000 residents. So we need to accommodate that growth somewhere. We need to accommodate all that traffic. So we need to accommodate Dunedin's traffic within Christchurch in the next 30 years. The best place to do it is to encourage people to walk and cycle to the local shops.
And that's fine, I don't think we need any of us would disagree with that.
Sure.
What I'm after is confirmation that there are going to be in the environment to be able to manage it to the area and more. Stuff that I'm talking about.
Yeah, look, we will have to keep monitoring the situation. Obviously, what we're trying to do is encourage people to use those other modes. It's going to be a matter of funding as to whether we've got funding to build additional infrastructure, and that will come down to a long-term plan discussion. In this area, what I'm aware of is obviously we've got a major cycleway coming through to serve Eastgate, and we're trying to, that's the big infrastructure, or transport infrastructure spend in this area. We have obviously got the Ferry Road master plan, and that had some provision for additional bus infrastructure and potentially widening part of Ferry Road to deal with additional traffic. But whether the funding of that will come down to the long-term plan discussion.
But actually what you're trying to do, Ellie, is take increased traffic out of there by making it, having more people living closer to the mall. That's the whole thrust of the residential chapter of the district plan. This area, for example, Linwood Intermediate School used to have a roll of 600. So it's got resource in that space for what was 600 kids, and at closure was about 130 kids. So it has actually got enormous provision. There is enormous land, there is enormous roads and everything in around there. It's not difficult to get to that area. Most of the schools are coming over onto that Linwood Ave site. And is Linwood Primary going into the new Linwood Ave school? Or does it stay where it is? Both of them are on this side of the road. And I've crossed that road many times with actually groups of school kids. It's not difficult to do. I'm not worried about that. I think it's quite a good area to walk in. I actually really like this part of town. I think it's great. And it just seems to me that if we don't keep consistency, then we do have a big problem of if we want to intensify, we need to do some of it. If you guys are really worried about all of it, I'm quite happy to go with your recommendation on chopping some of it, but the whole lot is just a wee bit